He didn't expect the vet who arrived to save the dog would be the one to rescue his heart. The morning his daughter found the pregnant stray shaking in the barn was the day everything changed. Jacob Kessler didn't believe in signs anymore, not since cancer stole his wife 2 winters ago and grief dried up the laughter on their Nebraska farm. But the dog had looked at him with those wide, terrified eyes like it had nowhere left to go, and he'd understood. He wasn't looking for anyone, not a soul. Between running the crops, raising an 8-year-old, and shouldering the silence of a house that used to hum with music, Jacob had no space for strangers, especially not the type that rolled in with soft hands and city boots. But then Dr. Elise Monroe stepped out of her truck and changed the way the wind sounded through the cornfields. She knelt beside the trembling dog like she'd done it 1,000 times, her voice low and sure. She didn't flinch when Jacob grumbled about vets from the city. She just looked at him, really looked, and somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted. He thought she was there to care for a broken animal. What he didn't know was that she was going to start healing everything else too. Jacob Kessler woke before the sun, same as always. The house sat quiet as a held breath, the wooden floor cool beneath his bare feet. He padded down the hallway, pausing outside his daughter's room. The soft sound of her sleeping steadied him in a way nothing else did. He moved past her door and made his way to the kitchen, where the coffee pot clicked on like clockwork. Outside, the wind rustled through the drying corn, hinting at another dry September day. He poured a mug, leaned on the sink, and watched the horizon turn from violet to gold. His face, reflected faintly in the window glass, looked older than he remembered. Not from the years exactly, but from the weight of them. Grief didn't show up all at once. It moved in slow and quiet, settling into the folds of everyday life until you forgot what lightness felt like. A faint sound pulled him from the fog, a thud, then a small, startled scream. He set the mug down, heart ticking quicker, and stepped onto the porch just in time to see Lily running across the yard from the barn, arms flailing. Her rubber boots slapped the ground as she yelled his name. "There's something in the hay," she called, breathless and wide-eyed. "It's a dog. She's hurt, or scared. Maybe both." Jacob didn't ask questions. He followed her to the barn, boots crunching over the dry earth. Inside, the smell of animals and old straw wrapped around him like an old coat. Light pierced the dim space in narrow shafts. He saw it then. A dog curled tight in the far stall, belly round, sides heaving. Her eyes tracked him warily, but she didn't move. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds, ribs showing, fur dull. He stepped forward slowly, hands low. The dog gave a weak growl but didn't lift her head. He crouched a few feet away, studying her. "She's going to have puppies," Lily whispered behind him. He nodded. The poor thing looked like she'd wandered for miles before collapsing here, probably dumped by someone too heartless to care. He felt something settle in his chest, something old and heavy. There were things in this world he could fix. A broken fence, a leaky roof, a busted tractor, but not this kind of suffering. "We'll need to call someone," he said. "She won't make it on her own." Lily's eyes shone with tears. "Can she stay? Please, Daddy." He wanted to say no. They didn't have time or money for stray animals. But there was something about the way the dog didn't look away, didn't flinch even as he stepped closer. She reminded him of someone standing on the edge, holding out just long enough for a reason to stay. "Go get my phone," he said quietly. "We'll call the vet." Lily sprinted out of the barn. Jacob stayed where he was, crouched beside the trembling dog, wondering when his life had become so quiet he could hear his own regrets echo in it. He reached out slowly, let his hand hover near her head. The dog didn't move, didn't growl again. Her breath hitched once, then steadied. He spoke low, not knowing why. "You showed up in the wrong place, girl. Or maybe the right one. Guess we'll find out." Behind him, the screen door slammed. Lily came running with the phone, her face bright with hope. He stood up, dialed the number for the vet's office, and braced himself for whatever came next. He was just trying to save a dog. That's what he told himself. What he didn't know, not yet, was that the person answering that call was going to bring more than medical supplies. She was going to bring change. The vet's truck rolled up just before noon, kicking up a small cloud of dust that hung in the still air. Jacob shaded his eyes as the vehicle pulled into the gravel drive. He expected someone older, someone gruff, maybe the same man who had come out years ago when the calf had gotten tangled in fencing. Instead, a woman stepped down from the cab, tall and lean, with her hair pulled back in a messy knot and a worn leather satchel slung over one shoulder. She didn't hesitate. Boots hit the ground with purpose. Her eyes scanned the barn, then met his without blinking. Gray, blue, sharp, steady. He didn't move from the barn door, arms crossed, watching as she approached like the place already belonged to her. "You, Jacob Kessler?" she asked, tone brisk, but not unkind. "That's me. I'm Dr. Elise Monroe. Your daughter said you've got a pregnant stray in bad shape." He nodded and stepped aside. "Back stall. She's not too happy to be here." "I'm used to that," she said, brushing past him. Jacob didn't follow right away. He watched her disappear into the barn, noted how easily she moved, how she didn't hesitate even once. She didn't look like the city vets he'd seen before, overdressed and soft-palmed. Elise wore jeans and a flannel rolled to her elbows, her boots scuffed and mud-stained. There was nothing delicate about her, but there was something precise, a kind of quiet alertness he didn't expect. From inside, he heard her voice go low and soothing. A few quiet words, a pause, the rustle of straw. Then her voice floated out again. "She's dehydrated. Might be early labor. She's holding on, but not by much." Jacob finally stepped in, hands tucked into the back pockets of his jeans. Elise was crouched beside the dog, her bag open, tools already laid out in neat rows. The dog was panting harder now, but she hadn't moved away. Her head rested near Elise's knee. "She let you get that close," Jacob said. "Animals know when you're trying to help," Elise replied without looking up. He watched in silence as she checked the dog's vitals, her hands moving efficiently. She worked like someone who had done this 100 times, but still cared every time. He didn't trust easily, not after everything, but something about her presence felt sure and grounded. He hated that it made him curious. "How long you been doing this?" he asked. 8 years in practice, most of them in Sacramento." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "Bit of a change, coming out here." She shrugged. Change was the point. They didn't say anything for a few beats. Outside, the wind brushed the cornfields. Inside, the dog's breathing steadied just slightly. "You got a name for her?" Elise asked. "No," Jacob said. "Didn't think we'd be keeping her." Elise glanced up at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. "Sometimes the things we don't plan for are the ones that stay." Jacob looked away. He didn't answer, but he didn't walk out, either. The sky had shifted by late afternoon, clouds piling heavy and low above the fields. Jacob stood outside the barn, arms folded, watching the weather turn the same way he'd watched the vet move all day, quiet and cautious. Elise had spent hours tending to the stray, giving fluids, gently cleaning the matted fur, murmuring to her like she'd known her for years. The dog had taken to her in a way Jacob hadn't expected, more trust than he thought an animal could offer after being tossed aside. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced toward the barn. Elise stepped out a moment later, her face lined with fatigue, one sleeve damp with something that wasn't water. Her eyes met his as she walked up the drive toward the house. "She needs rest, warmth, time," she said. "She might not make it through the night without complications." Jacob nodded, chewing the inside of his cheek. "You can head out," he said after a pause. "I'll keep an eye on her." "You've got antibiotics and subcutaneous fluids on hand?" she asked without a trace of sarcasm. He didn't answer, and she didn't wait for one. "There's a storm coming in. I can stay the night, just in case." He hesitated, Letting anyone into the house was a kind of intimacy he hadn't offered in years. The guest room hadn't seen fresh linen since before his wife got sick. Still, something about Elise's calm steadiness told him she wasn't looking for comfort or conversation. She just wasn't going to leave a living thing behind in a storm. That mattered to him more than he liked to admit. "The guest room's clean enough," he said finally. She gave a small nod, then turned back toward her truck for her overnight bag. Later, inside the kitchen, Lily sat at the table peeling an apple with more precision than most 8-year-olds could manage. She looked up when Elise entered. "You're staying?" she asked, hopeful. "Just tonight," Elise said, "to make sure your dog's okay." Lily beamed. "I named her Grace." Jacob blinked. "You didn't ask me." Lily shrugged. "She looks like a Grace." He didn't argue. It fit, somehow. Dinner was simple. Cornbread, leftover roast, vegetables from the garden. Elise sat across from him, shoulders relaxed but alert, the way people get when they're used to being the outsider at a table. Lily talked enough for all three of them, recounting how she found Grace, how she thought she saw the dog limping across the south field days earlier but wasn't sure. Elise listened the way she had listened to the dog, with focus, with care. After Lily went to bed, Jacob offered her a glass of water and pointed to the hallway. "Guest room's the first on the left. Sheets are clean, I think." "Thanks," she said. As she turned to leave, thunder rumbled deep across the fields. She paused and looked back at him. "She's a fighter," she said, "but she's not out of the woods yet." Jacob nodded once. He didn't say goodnight, but he stood in the kitchen long after she disappeared down the hall, staring at the space she'd left behind. The storm arrived in the early hours, wind pressing hard against the old farmhouse, rain drumming steady on the tin roof. Jacob had just started to drift into something close to sleep when he heard the sound. A low, sharp whine, almost like a cry. Then another, louder. It wasn't Lily. It was coming from the barn. He threw back the blanket and reached for his boots. By the time he made it down the stairs, Elise was already there, slipping on her jacket in the dim light of the front room. She didn't look surprised to see him. "She's in labor," she said, voice calm but quick. "Too soon and too fast." They didn't waste time with questions. The two of them ran across the yard, dodging puddles and fallen branches as thunder cracked above. The barn door groaned open under Jacob's grip. Inside, the light over the stall flickered once before, holding steady. Grace lay on her side, panting hard, her eyes wide with fear and pain. Her body shook with effort. The straw beneath her was already wet. Elise knelt beside her, opening her kit with practiced hands. She touched Grace's side, checking the contractions, whispering softly even though the wind roared just outside. "Her body's not ready," she said to Jacob without looking up, "but she's trying anyway." Jacob crouched down across from her, unsure of what to do with his hands. "Tell me what you need." Elise handed him a towel. "Warmth. Gentle pressure if I ask for it. Mostly, just stay calm." He nodded and moved closer. Grace whimpered, and Jacob reached out, resting his hand lightly on her side. Her breathing stuttered, then found a rhythm again. "She trusts you," Elise said. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure he trusted himself. The first pup came fast, small and slick, and barely moving. Elise cleared its mouth and rubbed it with a towel until it let out a thin, raspy squeak. She handed it to Jacob. "Hold him close. Keep him warm." The puppy fit in the palm of his hand, fragile and trembling, eyes still sealed. Jacob stared at it, heart pounding in a strange, unfamiliar way. The second one came slower, then a third, weaker than the rest. Elise worked steadily, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jacob followed her lead. Rain poured hard against the roof, but the world inside the barn was still, suspended in quiet urgency. Every breath from Grace, every soft cry from the puppies felt louder than the storm. She's losing strength, Elise said suddenly. We need to help her with the next one. Without waiting, she guided Jacob's hands, talked him through what to do. He listened, every muscle tense, trying not to let the fear show in his face. They worked side by side in silence, sweat and rain soaking into their clothes, hands moving in careful tandem. And then, finally, it was over. 5 pups, all alive, nestled against their mother's belly. Grace exhaled a long, shaky breath and laid her head down, eyes fluttering closed. Elise sat back on her heels, soaked through, breathing hard. Jacob handed her a towel, his own hands trembling slightly. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair had fallen loose around her face, strands clinging to her skin. Her eyes were tired but fierce. There was mud on her knees and straw in her sleeves, and she had never looked more grounded. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elise gave a half smile. "It's what I do." Outside, the storm began to pass. Inside, the barn was filled with new life, soft breaths, and tiny movements. Jacob looked down at Grace, and the pups curled close. Then he looked at Elise, and something inside him shifted, just a little. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to find out. By the time the sky turned pale with morning, the barn smelled of wet straw, milk, and the faint sweetness of new life. The puppies slept in a huddled pile, soft bellies rising and falling in uneven rhythm. Grace barely stirred, her body curled protectively around them, her breathing finally calm. Jacob leaned against a support beam, arms crossed, fatigue hanging heavy on his shoulders. Elise sat nearby, sipping from a chipped thermos he had dug out of the kitchen cabinet. She cradled it between her hands, like it was the only warm thing left in the world. "Coffee's terrible," she said, giving him a sideways glance. "I wasn't planning on company," he said, managing a faint smile. Elise nodded, but she didn't smile back. Her eyes were somewhere else, fixed on the pups for a moment, then out through the open barn door where mist curled over the cornfields. "My husband and I used to talk about buying land," she said. "Big sky, quiet mornings, chickens, maybe a couple goats, the usual dream." Jacob looked over, surprised. "What happened?" "He found someone else, bought a condo instead." Her tone was flat, without bitterness. He didn't press. They sat in the silence that followed, not awkward, not strained, just open. The kind of silence that let things settle without needing to be solved. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Me too," she replied, not unkindly. "But that was 3 years ago. I needed to get out of the city anyway. Too much noise, too many expectations. I wanted to feel like my work mattered again." "You make it look easy," he said. "It's not." She looked down at her hands, the edge of a smile finally forming. "But it's real." Jacob glanced at the pups, the way Grace adjusted slightly when one squirmed out of place. "You were good with her, with all of it. I've seen worse, but not often." He pushed off the beam, walked over to the stall, and crouched down. One of the pups had wriggled away from the others. He gently lifted it and tucked it back beside Grace's belly. "I used to think everything had to be earned," he said. "Respect, love, forgiveness. Like you had to work yourself raw just to deserve a little peace. But sometimes things just show up." Elise watched him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what made her pick this barn," he went on, still looking at the dog. "But I'm glad she did." They stayed there a while longer, the barn quiet, except for the soft sounds of sleeping animals and distant birdsong. Outside, the sky was clearing, sunlight catching in the drops still clinging to the grass. Eventually, Elise stood, brushing straw from her jeans. "I'll come back this afternoon," she said. "Make sure Grace is still stable." Jacob nodded. "You know where to find us." She paused in the doorway, then looked back once, not quite smiling. "Get some rest, Jacob." He watched her leave, the echo of her words hanging in the air. He hadn't rested in a long time. Not really. But this morning, something in him felt lighter. Not finished, but starting. Elise came back that afternoon like she said she would, pulling into the gravel drive with the same quiet presence as before. Jacob was out near the chicken coop with Lily, showing her how to fix a section of fencing the wind had knocked loose. He wiped his hands on a rag and stood when he saw the vet's truck, watching as she stepped out with her sleeves rolled up and a cooler tucked under one arm. "She's back," Lily said, grinning. Jacob nodded. "Go check on Grace. Let her know help's here." Lily didn't need to be told twice. She dashed off toward the barn. Elise walked over with an easy pace, the cooler swinging gently in her grip. "I brought more fluids, some vitamins, and puppy milk, in case Grace needs a break," she said. "You didn't have to," Jacob replied. "I know." She set the cooler down and glanced toward the barn. "How's she doing?" "Better than expected. Eating." Even wagged her tail when Lily brought her water. Elise smiled just a little. "She'll make it then." They walked to the barn together, not in a hurry. Inside, Grace lifted her head as they approached, eyes calmer, body more relaxed. The puppies nursed in soft, sleepy rhythm, their tiny bodies lined up like a string of breathing stones. For the next hour, Elise checked vitals, cleaned bedding, administered a few doses of medicine, and gave quiet instructions to Lily, who soaked it all up like sunlight. Jacob stood nearby, watching, listening, occasionally stepping in to help when she asked. It all felt natural, like they had done this before, like this small rhythm of life and care belonged to them. Over the next few days, Elise kept returning. Sometimes just to check on Grace. Other times, she stayed to help with chores or sit with Lily during lunch while Jacob worked the fields. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't talked about much, but her presence started to feel expected, not demanded, not assumed, just gently folded into the rhythm of the farm. Jacob found himself looking forward to her truck in the drive, to the way she carried herself like she had nothing to prove. She didn't pry, didn't fill the quiet with small talk. But when she did speak, it always landed. She asked about the wheat yield, about the tractor rebuild he had been stalling on, about how Lily was handling school without her mom. One morning, while walking the fence line with a pair of work gloves in her back pocket, she glanced over at him and said, "You know, you don't talk much." Jacob gave a half smile. "Didn't know I needed to." "You don't," she said. "But when you do, it counts." They kept walking. The fields were gold and full under the wide sky. A few crows flapped lazily in the distance. The quiet between them wasn't hollow anymore. It felt full, like soil, before the first green pushes through. That evening, Elise stayed for dinner again. Lily insisted on setting the table herself. She folded napkins in crooked triangles and poured lemonade with the care of someone arranging something sacred. They ate chicken stew and warm bread, and Elise laughed at something Jacob said under his breath, a sound he realized he hadn't heard from her before. It was soft and real, not guarded. Later, after Lily went to bed, they ended up on the porch, a lantern casting a small circle of light while the rest of the world stretched out dark and quiet. Crickets sang. The breeze smelled like cut hay. Elise leaned back against the railing, arms crossed. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked. "Once or twice," Jacob said, "but the land always calls me back." She nodded, looking out across the field. "I think I stopped listening to what calls me a long time ago." He didn't say anything, but he stayed beside her, not moving, just letting the night hold them there together. Jacob could feel it happening before he could name it. The ease, the routine, the way Elise slipped into their days like she had always belonged. She was never loud, never trying to take up space. But her absence after she left each evening echoed more than he liked to admit. He'd catch himself glancing toward the road before realizing what he was doing. Even Grace seemed to perk up when Elise appeared, tail thumping weakly against the barn floor. One evening, After a long day in the fields and a quiet dinner, Jacob found himself in the kitchen, washing dishes while Lily hummed in the next room. The soft clink of glass against ceramic was almost soothing. But beneath the stillness, his chest felt tight. There was a restlessness he hadn't felt since the days after Sarah died, a sharp discomfort that had nothing to do with work or weather. He thought about Elise, about her voice, steady and sure, about the way she listened without judgment, the way she looked at him sometimes, like she was seeing something he had buried and forgotten, and that scared him. He dried his hands and stepped outside, walking until the porch lights faded behind him. In the barn, Grace slept beside her pups, peaceful now. The storm that had brought her in was long gone, but Jacob still felt caught in the pull of something he didn't understand. She was leaving. He could feel that too. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and maybe she should. Her life wasn't here. She wasn't built for the long silence of the plains or the constant work of a place that never stopped needing. Later, Elise found him by the barn fence. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there beside him, hands in her pockets, eyes on the sky. "I'll be heading back soon," she said quietly. "Grace is stable, the pups are strong. You won't need me much longer." He nodded, jaw tight. "Makes sense." A long pause passed between them. "I wasn't planning on staying this long," she added. "I wasn't planning on needing anyone," he said. She looked over at him. "Then I guess we're even." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, leaving him alone in the field, surrounded by the sound of wind and the weight of what he hadn't said. Elise packed her truck early the next morning. The sun had barely crested over the fields, casting long shadows across the drive. Jacob stood at the top of the porch steps, coffee in hand, watching her move around the truck bed with quiet efficiency. She didn't look up until the last box was in place. Lily appeared at the door beside him, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her face was pinched, a frown tugging at her mouth. She didn't say anything, just stared down at Elise with wide, disappointed eyes. "I left a list," Elise said, walking up to the porch. "Feeding, dosages, signs to watch for. Grace should be fine, but if anything changes, call me." Jacob took the papers she held out, but didn't look at them. "Safe drive," he said. She gave a small nod. "Thanks." Lily stepped forward then. "Do you have to go?" Elise crouched in front of her, brushing a bit of hair from her face. "I do, sweetheart, but you've done such a good job with Grace. She's lucky to have you." Lily didn't speak. She just wrapped her arms around Elise's neck and hugged her tight. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. Jacob watched it all and said nothing. Elise stood. For a moment she hesitated, eyes flicking to his. He held her gaze, wanting to say something, anything, but the words stayed buried. "Goodbye, Jacob." He forced a nod, but it felt like a door closing. She got in the truck, started the engine, and drove off without another word. The tires crunched down the gravel until the sound disappeared behind the trees. Jacob stood there long after the dust settled, coffee gone cold in his hand, silence settling heavy around him again. The house felt hollow after she left. The walls echoed more than usual, every creak of the floorboards a reminder that something had shifted and then slipped away. Jacob kept busy. He always did. The chores didn't wait, and neither did Lily, who asked less and less about Elise as the days passed, though he could see her looking out toward the road when she thought no one noticed. Late one evening, Jacob walked into the barn to check on Grace and the pups. The straw was fresh, the water clean, and the pups slept soundly in a warm pile. On the small shelf near the stall, he noticed a worn envelope propped against a jar of ointment. His name was written across it in steady, familiar handwriting. He sat on the stool and opened it. The note inside was brief. "Jacob, I didn't come here looking for anything more than a job to do. What I found was something I didn't expect to place, that reminded me what it felt like to matter. I know we left things unsaid. Maybe that was easier for both of us. But if you ever find yourself wanting more than silence, you know where to find me. Elise. Jacob read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into his back pocket. Outside, the wind picked up through the trees. He stood slowly, walked to the barn door, and looked out over the fields that stretched into the dark. He had told himself she wasn't made for this life. But maybe she wasn't the one running. Maybe it was him. He turned back toward the house, his steps quickening as the sky deepened. Tomorrow would be too late. Tonight, there was still time to change something. The town was quiet by the time Jacob pulled up to the small rental house at the edge of the square. Lights glowed in the front window, soft and low. He sat in the truck for a long moment, hands tight on the wheel, heart heavier than it had been in years. Not from sadness, but from the sharp weight of hope. He stepped out, walked up the path, and knocked. A pause followed, then the sound of the door unlocking. Elise opened it, barefoot, her hair pulled back, a tired expression softening as soon as she saw him. "I wasn't sure if you would," she said. "I wasn't either," he replied, "but I read the note, and I knew if I waited one more day I'd regret it." She leaned against the doorframe. "What changed your mind?" "I did," he said, "or I'm trying to." They stood like that for a long moment, the night cool around them, the world holding still. Jacob reached into his pocket and held out a folded scrap of paper. The note. Her words, now creased and smudged. "I don't know what this is yet," he said, "but I know I want to find out, with you." Elise stepped closer, eyes searching his. "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm done waiting to be sure before I try." She smiled then, something quiet and full, and pulled him inside. The door clicked shut behind them, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob didn't feel like he was walking into something uncertain. He felt like he was finally coming home. The next morning, a new truck rolled up the farm road. Lily ran outside, laughing. Grace barked once from the barn, and Jacob stood on the porch, watching Elise step out into the light.